Thank you. Hello, I'm Chantastic on most places. Pretty simple. Oh, turn my thing on. I think I might be in the wrong place. I thought that this was Grifters Anonymous. So I prepared my story about how I lied, cheated, and stole my way into the industry. So you're just going to have to be stuck with that. I guess I don't really have a lot of code to talk about. So this is my grifter story. Back in 2011, I was working at a 3-person company. It was me, oops, sorry, VJ. It was me, Doug, and my dad. So it was a family company, and we were working on importing furniture from China and places in Asia for hotels, for all these redesigns that they were doing. But it was 2011, and it was right after the economy just collapsed. So all of our jobs just went sideways, and overnight our business was just in the shitter. Now I thought for sure so it was the first born into an Asian family. I thought for sure this was what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. And that all kind of fell apart. Now, I thought for sure, because it was a family business, I was gonna go before Doug. Unfortunately, it did not shake out like that. And if you've not ever had the experience of being laid off by your dad after the only other employee, Doug, it's psychologically traumatizing, let me tell you. So I was kind of in a tailspin. I was trying to figure out what I could possibly do because I went back out into the industry and found out that I was completely unemployable. I had a little bit of basically accounting and small business experience, but it was not transferable to the world at the time. People with kind of finance degrees were being snatched up for 30 cents on the dollar. It was impossible for me to find a job. I remember one time I went to an interview for a city accounting job, entry-level job, and there were people with degrees. There ended up being 400 people trying to apply to this city job for, I think it was $20 an hour or something like that. It was an insane time. So I didn't know what to do, and I was on unemployment, and I was trying to think about what else I could do with my life, because this accounting thing wasn't going to work out. And I started to remember that I've been hearing people say over and over again, anyone can code. Coding is an open industry for a lot of people right now. Now this was hard for me to believe because I had taken a class in middle school and was effectively told this was not a future for me. I was not a very bright programmer at that time. It was a class in C++ and Java, I think. It was just basic stuff, and I was terrible. I remember spending 2 weeks just trying to solve the what is it, Tower of Hanoi, where you get all the rings from one place to another. Failing so miserably that I just stole a friend's assignment that I found in their trash can and changed the variable names and then handed it in as my own. But I knew that I could write a function, and I knew that generally how HTML worked, and I figured maybe I can kind of claw my way into just an entry-level job in this industry. So real quick show of hands. Who of you have lied on a resume to get a job? Just you?
Just me, apparently.
No.
Just me.
I think, who's lying right now? So I'm going to tell you something even more shameful for me than lying, and it has to do with a t-shirt. So when I was going for my first So I found a handful of jobs on Craigslist that I was able to do, which was just basically Photoshop to HTML type stuff. And I was like, okay, and then I found a job that I thought would be perfect. It was in San Diego, which was a little far from me. It was going to be an hour commute each day. and it was very entry level pay. But like if I could have gotten it, it would like just changed things for me, because I was on 6 months of unemployment at that point, and things were looking pretty bleak. Now they had a handful of positions, and I decided to go for it. And I knew a friend of mine who was going for it, which kind of made me a little bit nervous, because he had more experience than me, and it was better experience. So they were looking for people who could do HTML, CSS, kind of understood JavaScript a little bit, and they would teach you the proprietary language that they built all of these e-commerce stores in. So I was like, sweet, I kind of know those a little bit, enough to like fudge it, and I'll get to learn on the job. This is great. And to my surprise, and to my friend's surprise, I ended up getting offered a job, and he didn't. And we both thought this was super weird, so we decided to like debrief it later. And so just out of curiosity, I was kind of starting to get a sense of how this industry worked. I said, like, what did you wear to your interview? And he's like, well, you know, I went and I got a haircut, shaved my beard, I put a suit on because I'm not an animal. I was like, oh, okay. And then he's like, what did you wear? I was like, well, I like wore my Converse, my jeans, and like a shirt that I found online. And he was pretty pissed that like he had really like felt like he put his best foot forward, and it kind of felt like I had like slummed it and like got the job. But that kind of unlocked this like idea in me, because I was kind of like working on a theory that like this industry works a lot more in like culture than actual like I don't know, qualifications. And so this kind of unlocked this idea for me that I had this like cheat code, that as long as I could like walk the walk, talk the talk, and like be confident in like my own skin, I could like walk into any experience, like walk into any company, and kind of figure the rest out on the job. Yeah, and so this kind of became an obsession for me. I started going to meetups like crazy. I started going to conferences just to try to figure out like what it was that, like, what is this shared experience of programming, or like programming? What's the meta experience of programming? And I was just voracious. I would just like steal stuff. So I'd hear people talking about like their strong opinions about tabs versus spaces, and I'd be like, that's mine now. I have a strong opinion about tabs versus spaces. But I didn't, so I just went home and I flipped a coin, and I was like, tabs it is. Then like 3 years later, I applied for another job, and they're all about spaces, and I'm like, oh dude, I've been about spaces forever. Like, show me the money. Now I knew that like this transformation in me was like starting to really take hold when like one day it was like the week of my wife's birthday. I'd been in this kind of state of like absorbing the industry for a little bit, and my wife was like, she's like, you know, all I want for my birthday is we just kind of like put the TV on the dresser, and we'll just like binge watch Gilmore Girls, you know, for most of the day, eat some ice cream, do that kind of stuff. And I was like, and I heard her, but I was just staring at the dresser, and I'm like looking, and she's like, what's going on? I was like, babe, like there's no way the dresser is structurally sound enough to like hold our 60-pound TV. And that was like apparently the wrong answer, because she was like, I didn't marry one of those Big Bang nerds. Get out of my house. And like I felt kind of bad. I was like, oh man, like that's the wrong thing. But then also I was like, yes, achievement unlocked. I'm like thinking like a nerd all the time. But then like I couldn't let it go, and I was like, well, actually, honey, like, I mean, like, Big Bang is like kind of a notoriously bad depiction of a science nerd. I'm more like an HBO Silicon Valley kind of nerd. Does that change how you feel about this exchange? And it did not. So what I learned through this kind of early part of my career is that more is caught than taught. And a lot of times we think that we're just like grabbing things, but really we're being influenced in ways that we don't really know. And we see the senior devs kind of behaving in a certain way and talking to each other in a certain way and talking to us in a certain way. And we think that that is like what it means to be a more advanced programmer. And that's not always true, because just like these habits, I was able to pick and choose these things that I felt strongly about. Bad habits also kind of spread. So I mean, being an asshole in PRs and like not like communicating with people and like just kind of holding to dogmatic opinions, those things kind of latched on to me as well. And this all came to a head when I started to think about how I was going to be transitioning into a senior level developer, because I was feeling like I had all of these like strong opinions, that I knew how to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk of being a developer and kind of living in that space and defending the things that I felt strongly about and dogmatically yelling about the things that I wanted to see changed. But there was this kind of tear in me, because there was this facade that I had of this person who was kind of like modeling after everyone around me, but then me who like still felt like I had no fucking idea what I was doing. And I think a lot of us experience this, and I think the industry calls it imposter syndrome or whatever, but there is this sense that there are two of us at some point in our career. There's this person who everyone sees and has expectations of, and me, the person who is well acquainted with the things that I don't know and the things that I'm fronting on. I was in this time watching this series on Netflix called Chef's Table, and they had an episode about Dan Barber, and he's this amazing chef, and he's actually more like a food philosopher, I guess. He controls the whole stack at his restaurant. He has a restaurant. They do it's a literal farm, and they do everything's like farm to table. Everything's in season. Everything's like humanely raised, and he is very, very thoughtful about food. And you watch him in these interviews, and he's very like quiet and thoughtful and soft-spoken, and you're like, wow, this guy is amazing. Like, he's really gonna like change things. And then as the episode goes on, they start to, they show him more in the kitchen, and you realize like this guy is a real monster when he's in the kitchen, like a real jerk to the people that are like under him when he's in the kitchen. And obviously this was kind of shocking to the documentarians too, because they ask him like, what's going on? Like, we're talking with you here and you're super soft-spoken and thoughtful and quiet, and then when you're in the kitchen, you're just like a hurricane. Like, what's going on? And I remember very vividly, he kind of leans back in his chair and he's like, I find my behavior in the kitchen to be abhorrent, but I don't know how to do it any differently. It's like the people who trained me acted that way, and the people who trained them acted that way. So I don't know how to behave any differently. And I was watching this and I'm just like weeping. I was like, it me. So from that, I started to realize that something that I had done, and I think a lot of people do, is we front with certainty. And it's because of these cheat codes that we learn. These best practices and patterns and whatever. We see these things that are kind of the document for like how we should be structuring our thoughts, our personas, our personalities, and it's like catnip for us, because we know that even though we might not have that problem yet, when we get to it, we can reach for that thing and be like, I know how to solve this problem. And the problem is that it kind of creates that rift that I was talking about, where our like skills and our certainty and our confidence outpace our ability, because we didn't actually do anything to acquire that knowledge. We just have it because someone else found it, right? So we don't have the requisite experience to know like, oh, like this is why these things are true. Now I'm going to pick on religion, not religion as a whole. I am a religious person, but the way that we pass down religion from generation to generation. Because this is something that happens in religion a lot. You see this in the kind of passing of the torch between generations, that there is that we tend to pass down not the reasons for the rules, but just the rules. We say, these are the rules. If you live by these rules, your life will be amazing and prosperous, and you're going to go to heaven. But we don't talk about the reasons so much for those rules. We don't teach people how to think. We just say, these are the rules, do it. Now, this thought also applies to non-religious people, because as we've been talking about code, I feel like as I've worked in these communities, like the Hacker News articles, Medium articles, best practices, those are like the holy book of programmers sometimes. And all of us are like forgetting that the most important part is to like kind of like train people up in thinking and knowing that like all of this stuff is really just kind of fashion. Like it's going to go in and out of fashion as the needs change, as our industry changes. But we go further and we train now our robots to do this. We're really devoting a lot of energy and attention to kind of like making our editors and GitHub and terminal and like everything else be like really angry at us all the time. So like blazing fast now you can know your code sucks and this is the reason. Even though maybe no one at your company knows why it's a good idea to write code in a certain way, except for the fact that someone said, these are the rules, you should do them. Now, I think another way this like kind of like parallels religion is that we have religion almost always has to have like an enemy, right? Like the devil or the empire or like things. There's always like an enemy that like we're trying not to become and is like kind of always like trying to attack us. So. Sorry, more on that. Like, but we rarely ever kind of think that the enemy is us. We like to blame our problems on our PMs, on the owners of the company, the industry, et cetera, et cetera. It's like rarely a problem with us actually actually taking the time to understand the things that we're like trying to build, our customers, et cetera. So I just wanted to say, from my experience, we've been trying to live like this for a while, but it's okay to be uncertain. It's very difficult to kind of admit to yourself, to your coworkers, to the people that you meet at conferences, the industry at large, your Twitter followers, that you don't know things. But it's okay, and actually I think that it's becoming incredibly popular to admit that you don't know things. To say, I don't know this thing, I'm gonna go figure it out, and I wanna bring you along with me. And part of the reason is because we're learning that there's really no universal rules. Like we keep being told, like if you make this, like if you do something like this, you'll avoid this class of mistakes. But as the industry changes, those rules don't quite adapt in the same way as like strong thinking. So at our company, we had this amazing Ruby programmer come and kind of teach us and like sit with us and talk with us about our code base for a little bit. And her training us was when this veneer kind of started to crack for me about kind of immutable best practices. And the first one that she kind of attacked was the idea of DRY. Is everyone familiar with DRY? It's an acronym for don't repeat yourself. So the idea is that your code should never have duplication. If there's duplication, you need to like abstract that out into like function and like only use the abstraction. Now, that is like a good thing, but it's one of those things that everyone kind of thinks is immutably true all the time. You should never repeat yourself ever. Now remember when we were in this class with her, she would give us these assignments, we would show her our code, and she'd be like, this is amazing, this is the best code that I've ever written, it's so dry, like she's gonna love it and be impressed with me, and I'm gonna have a superstar developer be impressed with me, and that's gonna satisfy me from the inside and heal me and make me not feel like a loser. And I just remember like we would show her these results, or we would show her our assignments, and And over and over again, she would say, that code looks so dry that it chafes. Which was so bizarre for me because I had always thought, like my entire time developing, that like dry was like one of the most important things you could do. You should always be looking for code to dry out. And what she would do is she would ask, okay, well, that looks great now, but like if I ask you to change it so that it now accomplishes that task and this other thing that we need to do, what are you going to have to do? And so often the answer was, oh, well, we'll have to break that abstraction down, pull it out into its requisite pieces again, and then kind of build it back up again, or rebuild all of the abstractions. And she was saying, like, yeah, it just seems like you're doing a lot of work for this idea that you have about good code that just seems to be standing in your way every time change kind of breaks what you knew. So what she told us was the purpose of design is to allow you to do design later, and its primary goal is to reduce the cost of change. And this just opened my mind to the idea that the best code is not the one that adheres strictly to rules, but code that is living and adaptable. That every time we have a change, we know that the code base is going to support that change in the best way possible. And I started to think about this idea that like dry is kind of more like a dead thing than it is like a living thing. Like us, we have to drink hibiscus water from that lying jar over there. Just to stay hydrated. We have to stay hydrated. Like hydration is a very important thing to all living organisms, right? Maybe not all. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But for us, it is. And the more something like an organic thing starts to dry out, the more it is dead. So, yeah, and I don't have any with me, but I like to think about Play-Doh, right? If you have a brand new thing of Play-Doh, imagine like just kind of pulling the lid off, you pull out your Play-Doh, it's like pliable and like the future is yours. You can make it whatever you want. But over time, that Play-Doh starts to dry out and it remains in whatever form it dried out in. And as you kind of like, maybe you can force it and change it, but it like cracks at the edges and it might crumble. And if you want to use that Play-Doh some more, you have to, I don't know how you rehydrate Play-Doh. Oil, maybe? Maybe you can YouTube it. It's an assignment. You can, if you find yourself on your phone, you can just tell me at the end. So I started to realize that there's a context to every rule. So everything that we learn, everything that we try to pass down, everything that gets passed down to us has an inherent context. And unfortunately, the context doesn't usually get sent along with the pithy rule that we learn. So one of the lines that I kind of see is like things that we know and things that we don't know. Things that we know tend to be stable. They tend to kind of change a little bit less. There's a little bit less churn. And it's like those things kind of naturally become hardened. And that's fine. But there's also things that we don't know, and those things need to be pliable because the more that we learn about the customer, the more that we learn about our code, our team, like we need to be able to adapt and change because trying to rehydrate code just to make changes is really frustrating. It's a really irritating way to work. So think about this. So dry, we know, is really good. Like when you have stable code, you want to work on layers of abstraction. You want to know that that if you have this one kind of formatting thing that happens all across your app, and that changes, you want to change it in the one place, know that it changed everywhere. You don't want to have to change it in 50 places. Like that would be very stupid. So it's good. When things are stable, this is awesome. You want that to be the case. However, dry on this side, as we've kind of talked about already, it can be a real bummer because you dry things out right before you commit them, and then the next sucker who has to do a Trello card or fix a bug now has to like rehydrate everything and then kind of do that same thing, dry it up so that like they can get all the +1s on their PR. Now this goes the opposite way too, right? So readability is like a very important thing. We have like most of our language development is designed around the readability of code. So this is awesome, like we want readability. However, if you have like very stable, hardworking code, typically over time, it ends up being less readable because you end up having to do some certain things to eke out a little bit of performance. And readability, while still important, becomes a lesser important thing to performance and stability and all of these. So it can actually be a liability on the other side if we apply that rule in the wrong place. Now, for me, I'm a React developer. A lot of front-end stuff these days is kind of going to components. And I think of components as our architecture. Now, if you're if you're a JavaScript developer in other veins, I think of modules as our architecture. And the reason why is because modules are composable. We can take two different modules, we can kind of wire them together and compose together a new sound in this case. And the super cool thing is that these modules don't have to come from one person or one place. We can string together a ton of different modules from different places, different manufacturers, different teams, and we can string them together to make a new sound. And if we don't like one of them, well, we can just burn it and replace it with something else. You love my keynote art, don't you? It's so good. Okay, so really the beautiful thing that we're starting to be able to work with in JavaScript is these hot swappable black boxes, right? I don't care what the implementation is. I just want to know that it does what it says on the tin, and I can plug it into the stuff that I already have and move on with my life. And if it doesn't work, I'm just going to throw it away and find something else that does it, or write the thing that I need to write. Now, clean code in this way is fashion because you're thinking a lot about. Clean code focuses so much on the guts of these things as opposed to the interface, like the thing that is actually shareable. And like fashion, it really is it is the result of a bunch of people having the same problem. But the problem is that when the problem changes, now these rules don't necessarily apply anymore. So I want to talk about hot garbage architecture. This is the way that I think about code. I think code should be just isolated garbage that is hot swappable, the way that we have our modules. So there's 4 kind of tenets or things to think about when you're writing code in this way. Well, first, I'm going to start with 0 because there's no 4 emoji, so I thought I'd make this a 0-based number 4. So 0. Pliability. Okay, the enemy of pliability is speculative generality. Now, this is a term that is widely used, but effectively it means this. Say that you are going on some kind of expedition, and you know that you are going to need a bridge to cross this thing. And you say, well, we're going to need a bridge, right? Instead of figuring it out then, when we get to the place where we need the bridge, we're going to build a fucking bridge now, and we're just going to carry it with us until we get there. So that's what speculative generality is you know that you need to do the thing, but instead of being patient and waiting for all the constraints to actually present themselves to you and solving them at the right time, you decide to solve them now, even though you don't have all the constraints. So, and this is kind of like hole-in-one odds. This is very impossible to do because the constraints and the context guide the solution. So it's like being a golfer and being a sucky golfer and saying well, my problem isn't that I'm a bad golfer, it's that I don't make enough hole-in-ones. And so I just need to optimize around hole-in-ones, and the more hole-in-ones we get, then I'll be a better golfer. It doesn't work like that. Now this is something in React, this is the bane of my personal existence. There's this thing called ESLint React plugin or something, and it has all of these super pedantic rules about how to write React from people who I don't think ever wrote React. They just like to write rules. So this one in particular is no multi-component, and it forbids you from ever defining more than one component in a single file. And it is the most trash rule. I literally have a keyboard shortcut that just adds the comment to make the rule not apply in the file, and spits me back out to wherever I was, because this one is bullshit. And it is because of like speculative generality, because you have to then, you have to build up all of these other things around how to organize code when you can only put one module per file, right? As opposed to being like, this is a module of components, functions, like whatever, and they're all related, so like they're all isolated in this thing. Anyway, tangent, done. Number 1 or 2, depending on how you're counting, is composability. This is my favorite Lego set in the entire world. I love this thing more than anything. I asked my son if I could bring it with me, but he put all of his Legos together and now we can't find it, which is depressing because I looked it up online so that I could just carry it around with me as an example of proper modularization, and it's like $30 now because they don't make them anymore. And I ain't spending $30 on Legos. So the thing that I love about this set is that it's a 3-in-1 set, but it's like a perfect 3-in-1 set. So you get this box, and in there are these pieces, and you can build any of these things. Tear it down and build the other thing, and not have any extra pieces. It is spectacular, and now that I'm talking about it, it might be worth the 30 bucks because I love it. Now, this is the way that, so this serves as an example of the way that I want to kind of build up components, modules, UI libraries, etc. This idea that I'm not giving you one thing, I'm giving you the pieces to make whatever you need to make. Now, we see a lot of components like this sometimes, where as they get more complex, they get more features, and they get more props. And they get props for like the weirdest thing, like close class name, right? Open class name. Like when you only provide one component, you have to go this route. You have to say, oh, well, anything that's customizable, we need to kind of expose as a prop. Yeah, so this is a problem. We're giving one thing instead of the pieces to build whatever you need. So now this is going to be like kind of daunting, but this is kind of that same type of component, like an accordion component, but then in a more composable way. You kind of import all of these different components. They have different features, but then you have full control over all of the APIs of those individually. So this is a lot more like our modular system where we can say, I want this effects pedal, this wah pedal, and this like delay thing, and I want to compose them together the way that I want for my particular sound. And actually, I might just bring in this pedal from like some other manufacturer and kind of style this thing a certain way. So you get that when you have modules that expose a bunch of their internal pieces instead of just one big interface for a thing that does the job. And I like to think of this as components over configuration. Instead of having a bunch of configuration like props, you just give people components. So that's something that I always think about, is like, does this thing need more props or does it need more components? Is this prop valuable, or is it, or should it be a component that people have more control of and can kind of choose not to use? This works for functions as well. The second in our zero-based list here is reasonability. So this is like an important tenet. So I have, this is a little bit of a stretch on the emoji, so I'm going to explain it to you. So an umbrella in the rain is reasonable. It's kind of like our bridge scenario. No rain is unreasonable. Okay, this is like a realistic situation, and this is a speculative situation. We're carrying around an umbrella with the kind of understanding that maybe it might rain. And one place that I see this, this kind of unreasonable speculation is in perf optimization. There's so many rules out there, especially in React, where people are like, oh, you should never do this because it might lead to a performance problem. Okay? This is like, they're saying you should always make this thing performant under the metrics that we think are the most important performant metrics, and you should never veer away from that. And I teach classes all the time, and so we'll do like this like click counter, and like I'll use like an inline arrow function, and inevitably like people who don't know React have heard that you should never use these like inline arrow functions. Like you should kind of create a constructor and like bind the methods in the constructor. Like people who are like in a class learning React know that like they shouldn't be doing this thing. And so like yeah, this is the code that always raises some eyebrows. But the thing is that like this is not unperformant, right? It's like one thing, and every time you click it, it's like the browser is going to work. I am the what is it? I'm the bottleneck on the performance of this button, right? Like I can't click this thing fast enough for the computer to not know what's going on. And I sincerely doubt that this app is ever going to look like this, right? Like I don't even know what the fuck's going on. So there's a context under which like certain types of performance are important. And since you'd never make an app like this, it's never really important to optimize for an app like this. And definitely not every single time you write anything. Now, for this, like one thing that I really like, a recommendation that I have is to just develop a great relationship with your manager, because managers are in the business of money, and they and like money is like the North Star for like everything that we should be doing. We don't like code is not awesome. Like it's only awesome for the fact that it does this job. Like it doesn't have to like, it doesn't want to look pretty. Like it's not disappointed when it's unsightly. Like it doesn't care, right? And so we need to be kind of thinking more in like the goals of our business, thinking more in like how things change, the health of our company, etc. Managers also know that code rage is immutable. Like no matter what, you're gonna hate what you commit. Like if they give you an extra week, you're gonna hate it at the end of that week. If they give you an extra month, you're gonna wanna rewrite it in Go or Elm or whatever it is that you're reading about at that time. Like the more time they give you, the crazier you will get. So like just live in the serenity of sanity, and just kind of, you know, just develop a good relationship with them. Let them help you not go crazy. Now there is one more objective tool that I like to use when working in code and talking about when something needs to be refactored. So this is the churn versus complexity graph. The idea here is pretty simple, and there's some tools like was it Code Climate has some tools for evaluating this. They have a little chart that'll show you. Churn is just how many times something like a file changes. Complexity is like how many logical trees there are in there to like do the job that it needs to do. So it'll be able to evaluate the complexity for you of each like file, module, component, whatever, and then it will also be able to tell you how often that thing changes. Now, if you have like a lot of complexity, but like it doesn't change a lot, that's fine. Don't touch it. Don't worry about it. If you have a lot of churn, but the complexity is low, that's actually awesome, right? Like you want things that have low complexity and low churn. So like this is a happy place to be. The problems are when you have high churn and high complexity, because you have something with a lot of complexity, it's hard to load into your brain every time, and it's regularly changing. Like we don't know enough about it to know how to make it stable, and that's why it keeps having to change. So these are the things that you need to worry about. Why am I changing this code so often, and why is it so freaking hard to do so? The last thing on our list is disposability. You want your code to be disposable. The first person who ever believed that I might have some talent as a programmer said to me early on, he said, when you add code, ask how easily it'll be removed when you realize you were wrong. And this is the best advice that I ever got from anybody, was the idea of deleting your code. So This is the hot garbage architecture. Is those 4 things: pliability, modularization, reasonableness, and disposability. So what can I tell you? Well, what I can tell you doesn't really matter a whole lot, but I love working in this way. I feel happier working with this way. I feel like I give better critique in PRs working this way, but it doesn't matter. You should listen to smarter people than me. So I think that Kent Beck is one of the smartest developers that there is in the world. And he says, and his rules for code are to make it work, make it right, and then make it fast. He is the, he designed the idea of extreme programming, where you kind of like write tests first to be like, this is the thing that I need. I'm going to fulfill the interface, and then I'm going to make the code to do the thing that I need, and then move on with my life. And like, he's a pretty smart dude, because he, I think until recently actually, was like a C-level person at a company whose motto was moves fast and break things. So mute the thought leaders. Remember that like the product is just like a function of specifications, and we're the function. And sometimes that means that we're just like kind of like shoveling shit from here to there and back again. It's fine, because like green code is green code. You code that is living is money code, and like the more that you can like change it and satisfy your customers, the better off you are. So we're all grifters, and I think that one of the things that has really helped me out is kind of breaking down this idea, this analogy that we're builders. Because I think it's pretty patently false. I think that it makes sense in terms of lines of communication and the way that we work together to build things. But I think that it doesn't really help us when we think about how we should feel about our jobs, how we feel about writing code. Because we're really not engineers or developers or architects, even though we use like frameworks and scaffolding and all of this language that's kind of infiltrated our work. I think that really we're a lot more like farmers. We work on living things, and we work against the elements a lot of times. A lot of times we don't know like what the weather's going to be like or how things are going to work. I'm not going to go too deep into the farm analogy, but we work on living things that kind of fight back on us a little bit, and like they're kind of unpredictable, and they put up a fight, and like cultivating is a mess sometimes. It doesn't have like a clear like A to B type of trajectory. So, oops, sorry, I accidentally clicked too fast. So I gave away the answer, but who knows what the best fertilizer is? It's shit. It's shit. And sometimes, our code needs to have a little bit of shit sprinkled on it so that we can kind of figure out what the next steps are. We have to work before we can know. So in an effort to be a little bit like one of these little graphics, I thought I would end on a Bible verse. Oh no, it went right to the end. Okay, so this is my favorite Bible verse. I actually include this into PRs that I feel not quite great committing, but get the job done. And the Bible verse goes like this. It says, "Where there are no oxen, the stable is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of the ox." My interpretation of that is that clean code is dead code. There's shit where money is made. Get it? So that's me. I am Chantastic. I teach React on a site called learnreact.com. I have website. So I'm actually moving it to like a different platform. So it's actually school.reactpatterns.com. But if you go there from learnreact.com, you can get 50% off. And I'm going to make a new course on that cool stuff that React is coming out with in a couple weeks. So yeah, anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for not falling asleep. And any questions?